Lorenzo di Bonaventura is the producer for Transformers 1, and he's actually been the producer on pretty much all the Transformer movies up until this point. But Transformers 1 is a whole new vibe. It's an animation, and it takes us all the way back to the origin story of Optimus Prime. I actually had the chance to have a quick conversation with him about this movie to understand where his thought process is. And as a giant geek who grew up watching Transformers, playing with my brother's Transformer toys, yep, I did steal them. I really had a lot to ask him, not only about this movie, but the franchise in general. And I'm so stoked that South Africa had a chance to pick his brain and to hear from him. Thank you so much for joining us. And I've been really lucky. I got a chance to actually see the movie Transformers 1 before everyone else. And I've got to be honest, coming into it, I feel horrible for saying this. I had a little bit of Transformers fatigue. And I think this is something that's very common with a lot of folks at the moment, feeling a little bit fatigued about these franchises that have been going on for years. Were you worried about that when you were producing this movie? Is it something you think about?
It's absolutely something we think about. One of the reasons we wanted to do this story is that it's so different than anything we've done before, both visually, obviously, because it's animation, but also just the brotherhood and the idea that you're allowed to see an entire movie from a Transformers point of view. So our hope was that this would attack that fatigue.
And one of the other things I noticed is there was a lot more narrative and storytelling in this movie. So there's all that action, but it's almost always peppered with a lot of dialogue and a lot of conversation. That's not something that we've seen a lot in these action movies. It always felt to me like we'd cut down the amount of conversation that was happening. Again, was that a decision that you took to make sure that there was a lot more story building and conversation happening?
Well, there's sort of two things. One of the advantages of telling this story is the story truly is a character-based story. So it allows you to do it. So it's not about the plot, really. Yes, the plot's important, but the reality is this is a story about two best friends who become mortal enemies. That is why there's a lot of talking, if you would, because it is literally about what is happening to each of those two characters as they do this transformation. So it gets away from, okay, let's make sure the plot has to move forward, etc. Because what has to move forward is actually the relationship.
And that's the thing, because this is the prequel to all the Transformers movies we've seen. It is the origin story, if you like, of the hero and the villain. There's so much source material. I think it's like 40 years of like Transformers toys and cartoons and the movies that you've been involved in. How do you go about taking all of that material and making sure that you stay true to it? Because obviously the diehard fans want that, but then also creating something that is going to resonate with audiences that are bombarded with so much content at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a very interesting thing because we love our fans but in some respects their passion can cut against them, because what happens is that, and I've seen this with a lot of franchises, everybody gets crazy about, oh, they changed such and such a thing, right? Well, I think, I'll give you an example. When we first tacked the first movie and people saw the pictures, they said, Michael Bay has ruined my childhood. Now, the irony of that is that, first of all, they look cool as hell. A filmmaker's job is to progress the imagery, progress the storytelling, etc. And truthfully, if we had done, I think what many fans wanted us to do was just replicate the TV show, they would have been bored as hell. And it would have looked goofy on the big screen. So that's one of the challenges, is that you both have to move the franchise. I hate saying franchise. You have to move the world that it is forward, or else it becomes boring because you've been there before. And that's the tricky balance.
Do you think that you found that balance with this movie when you look back at it now? Because I've always wondered how that is, watching it back after you've probably spent years putting so much of your heart and soul into it.
Having done so many of the movies, having done all of the movies, but we've done a lot of them, we've learned along the way how tricky the tone of each one of the movies has a slightly different tone, and how tricky that is to communicate and be consistent all the way through a movie. And so one of the things that was a struggle on this movie was actually trying to keep separate Orion Pax from Optimus Prime and D-16 from Megatron, because we've been so influenced by those characters. So when we were first writing the scripts and then we were putting them up, we were like, that's wrong. He's already Optimus. Like, he can't be Optimus. So that was actually the real struggle of the movie, was always reminding ourselves that as much as we loved Optimus, as much as you expected Orion Pax to act like Optimus, he's not Optimus yet. And so that's where I think the tone of the movie changes, because it has such a sense of reality about character. You know, I honestly don't always think the big movies should be about character, because sometimes that, twisters, just go and see crazy twisters. But to me, the idea of how you're going to engage the audience changes in each movie. In this case, it's this progression of character for both lead characters.
It's a beautiful story, but I think what's also beautiful is the world that the team was able to build. It's so what I think my childhood imagined when I was watching Transformers, but also not at all what I could have imagined. And I know that there's been a lot of conversation and interviews where you've said we had to do this animated because of the cost, but do you think making it an animated film also allowed you a lot more freedom to explore that like crazy creative that we get to see on the big screen?
But yeah, both things sort of go hand in hand, because the imagination you can apply to animation is ridiculously expensive in live action, but you're allowed to do it. So I would say, look, if we had done this live action, we probably would have done the planet transforming. There were certain things we probably would have tried to pull off. But yes, we got far more freedom in this case to push the visual boundaries of everything we were doing. And all of our goals was, I don't know about you, but I find it's kind of boring when you go to these planets. They're all so dull, and they're, in your outer space, and, and perhaps they're appropriately so. But like, here was an opportunity to make a planet that's glorious colors, glorious expanses, and it just doesn't seem so inhospitable.
Final question. I mean, it is the origin story. It is a prequel. Are we going to see more of these? Is that the plan? Do we get to explore this world more?
That's our intention, for sure. I mean, like every sequel, it depends on how the first one performs. But we've had such great positive feedback from people like yourself who say, "Wow, that movie is very cool," and people are surprised by the level of the emotion, etc. We're excited about keeping forward, because in live action, every time the robot, being a 3D CG creature, talks, it's wildly expensive. So we've never really been able to do point of view of a robot, if you would. And we're allowed to do whatever point of view in the animation. So we kind of know where we're going, and we're hoping the audience supports us enough to keep going, because you are given a pass for your freedom of creativity that you don't get in live action.
Lorenzo, thank you so much for your time. I'm very excited about this movie. I love the fact that I think a whole new generation of Transformers fans are going to get hooked with it. But also, if you are someone like me that grew up with the cartoons, that's been watching the movies for so many years, it's just revitalized my love for the whole franchise. And I'm very excited to see how people react to the movie.
Fantastic.
And also where we go next.
So now I got a question for you.
Go for it.
In the live action, would you get most excited if we did a reboot of the series, or would you want us to continue sequel from Rise of the Beast?
For me, I would prefer to see a reboot of the series, purely just because I think we've had enough time where we could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like I said, I think that there was so much, and there's been so many, that doing a reboot would just be like a really interesting, different take. Maybe even if you didn't do it from the perspective of Bumblebee and you moved into something else, I think that would be quite fun. I think enough time has passed. I'm normally not a fan of a reboot. I'd say no, but in this case, I think it might be time. But I also want to see a lot more of the prequels, because I've really enjoyed that as well.
Well, we're going to do both. So, but we don't. I don't know whether we're going to do. It's the argument that's raging right now amongst us all. I agree with
There
you.
we
I
go.
think we should do a reboot.